The Lord be with you. Thanks for joining our King of Glory family as we read through Genesis on a rapid fire pace, doing Genesis 1 through 12 the first week, and then Abraham and then Isaac next week, and Jacob the next week, and Joseph and his brothers the next week. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so trying to help you to read more than just read a story, in one ear, out the other, start to notice things. So let me introduce Abraham with question number 16 from your discussion guide, and that chart is amazing. It is an amazing chart, the sin, judgment, grace. So let's run through that to introduce the story of Abraham. The sin of Genesis 3, the rebellion of Adam and Eve against God, where God said, hey, learn good and bad from me. And Adam and Eve say, we've got this. We can learn good and bad from the magic tree. And the judgment is, of course, death. And along with that, everything involved in death, like interpersonal relationships, struggles and strife, pain and childbearing, painful labor, toilsome labor, producing weeds. And then the grace, you'll notice that God clothes them. They had been clothed in, I believe, good Lutheran answer, they had been clothed in God's righteousness. They were naked and not ashamed. And now they were ashamed. God clothes them, and then he promises a savior. And this is very cool in 3:15. Depending on the translation, he will bruise the seed of Eve will bruise the head of the snake, killing it. The snake will bruise the heel of the seed of Eve, which no one pointed this out to me before, but that bruising is a bite. And what kind of snake bites except a poisonous snake? Sorry, venomous snake. A venomous snake bites, and that too is a fatal wound. And so the serpent's head is crushed, but Jesus is killed as well. I think that's very cool. That's the grace, Genesis 3:15. Chapter 4, we have Cain and Abel. Once again, Cain is unable to figure out what's good and what's bad, and kills his brother. The judgment on Cain is that he will be wandering and not be able to settle down in this earth, and he fears death, and God puts a mark upon him so that no one will kill Cain. That's the grace. Okay, you're tracking with me. Chapter 6 through 9, we have the sons of God treating women like cattle, just taking them and acquiring them. The violence is horrific with these people in chapter 6. The earth is becoming an unlivable place again, and the judgment is the flood. The grace is first and foremost Noah, that God saves Noah and his family in the ark. You'll notice that in chapter 6 through 9, that God is undoing the days of creation. He's undoing days 2 and 3. Pay attention to that if you didn't notice it last time and you want to go back because you've got extra time. And then he redoes the days of creation. And this is so cool with the sign of the covenant at the end of chapter 8, verse 22. While the earth remains, and this is the significance of the rainbow, again, part of God's grace. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, that's day 3. Cold and heat, summer and winter, that's day 2. Day and night, that's day 1, shall not cease. God will no longer destroy the earth by flood. So every time you see the rainbow, you can look up and say, next time by fire. I always think that's funny, because I crack myself up. Then we have the rebellion of the Tower of Babel in chapter 10. The judgment is that God divides the language and scatters the people. They all wanted to gather, and God scatters them and says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So I'm going to make you fill the earth by dividing the languages, which, let me just political side note, it's a lot easier to control people when they all speak the same language. Yeah. So what a blessing that we speak different languages. Even though it makes communication really hard, it makes control really hard too. So anyway, that's the judgment, if you can call it that. And then the grace. you catch it? This is so awesome. So it's what the story that immediately follows. It's the story of Abraham. God chooses Abraham as the human, Abraham and Sarah, the man and the woman who will do what Adam and Eve failed to do and restore humanity, or at least begin the process of restoring humanity. Okay, you think on that for a second. All right, story of Abraham. Jump to question number 24. And actually, I kind of want to do 21 and 24. So in question 21, tally up the ways Abraham and Sarah make bad decisions that threaten God's desire to bless them. Question 24, highlight the times God makes or reaffirms his covenant with Abraham. What's going on in his life before each covenant promise? What is Abraham thinking? What is Abraham feeling? You notice you're not given much in the way of details. So let's begin with Genesis 12. Yahweh said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. Where is Abraham? Okay, I believe he's, if you look at the end of chapter 11, he was in Ur of the Chaldees, I believe. His father moves them up to Haran on their way to Canaan, but they stop halfway and they settle there. And Yahweh, this is important, Yahweh, because Abraham has lived his life, I think, in an urban area, a populated urban area. And now God is calling him to who knows where, calling him to leave his family and leave his other gods. And that's the part we need to understand. Joshua makes this clear that Abraham was an idol worshiper. At least I think he makes it clear. Abraham worshiped all these other gods. And so who is Yahweh? What do we know about Yahweh? What does Abraham know about Yahweh? He's just one of the gods, apparently. And he shows up to Abram and says, hey, Abraham, got a deal for you. Get up, leave everything that you know, leave your family, leave your friends, leave your land, and go who knows where to the place where I'll show you. And I'm going to make all these grandiose promises to you. And Abraham's like, who are you? Okay, are you with me? Track with me what's going through Abraham's mind. Because the very next thing, he gets to the land and God reaffirms the promise. I don't know if you're doing this, but check out the mountains and check out the trees. This is like bonus material. I've been doing this and it's not as interesting as I thought, but it is interesting when there's a tree. And so God makes this promise of descendants, which is a huge part of the promise, at age 75 for Abraham. And it's going to be 25 years before God delivers on the promise. So what's going through Abraham's mind, for example, when there is a famine? Now, I have never experienced famine. I have experienced drought. You know, back in California, they told me for years there's a drought. And as far as I know, my tap always worked. I'd turn on the tap and water would come out. That's my experience with drought. Is I turn on the tap and water comes out. Up here in Washington, it has not rained today, therefore we're in a drought. But he has this famine that he's going through. God told him go to Canaan, and now Abram goes to Egypt, and he loses his wife. Okay, you get this? So I'm told that there's 7 tests, that Abraham goes under 7 tests, and the first test is go to the land. The second test has to do with the famine and what he does with that. And note the test with Lot. And I never know with these tests, you know, like some of them I'm wondering, are they 2-part tests, 3-part tests? But I'm told there's 7, and I'm still trying to figure that out, that there are 7 tests. So you can look for those. The test with Lot, notice that God said to Abram, leave your family. And so Abram brought Lot, which is a loving thing to do because Lot's dad was dead. Yeah. All right, so go through each of these And you'll notice, for example, in chapter 15, verse 1, after these things, the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Now, what are the after these things? Notice that he's just been in battle. Now, I'm guessing most of us in our church family have not experienced live fire, where like you're killing and risking being killed. Okay, if you've never experienced that, it's really bad. It's horrifying. It's shocking. It's hell, kind of hell on earth. That's what we human beings like to do. We like to create hellish situations, but we've not experienced that for the most part for the last, quite a long time. Okay, last time we had a draft, I think, was Vietnam, which was 50 some years ago. When we had such horrors where everybody was forced into it. So Abram has just almost died, and God says, hey, I'm going to give you a great reward. And Abram's like, dude, I just almost died in battle, and I have no heir that you promised me. Okay, you're with me? So track through these situations, and when God reaffirms the covenant, he goes, hey, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to do this or that for you. Pay attention to what's going on. Other part of that in chapter 15, when Abram doubts God and says, hey, I have a complaint against you, God goes outside and says, hey, Abram, look at the stars. And that's how many descendants you're going to have. And Abraham believed God, and God credited Abraham's faith as righteousness. What's the connection between seeing the stars and Abraham believing that God will give him a child? What's the connection? Look at the stars. Can you count them? I'm going to give you children. Abraham believed God. What's the connection between the stars and the Abraham believing? Okay, so cool, so cool. You're going to notice that the child is a big part of the testing of Abraham. Chapter 16, where Abraham's like, oh, hey, you promised me a child. Pay attention to the wording, because as you read chapter 16 and what the words used to describe Sarah and Abram, okay, this is why chapter 3 is so important, because note what Eve does in chapter 3. Okay, if you haven't noticed this, or you don't remember that I said this, because I'm going to keep repeating myself because this is so important. The woman saw that the tree was good for something, and she took and she ate and she gave to her husband. And God says to Adam in 3:17, you listened to the voice of your wife. And so if you didn't catch this in chapter 16, note the repetition of those words from chapter 3 in chapter 16. And it's with regard to Hagar, but it's really about Isaac. Okay, it's really about Isaac being the forbidden fruit, and Abraham and Sarah saying, oh, we've got this. We can discern what's good and what's bad. All right. Bonus material. Again, keep going through those promises of question number 24. Bonus material, chapter 18, I think is a little confusing, but if you pay attention to chapter 18 and 19, pay attention to ancient Near Eastern hospitality. I think this is so important for us to grasp. So these three guys show up, three humans. One of them is Yahweh and two are angels. Right, they're later called angels. One's called Yahweh, one called angels. Three guys show up. Note Abraham's hospitality that he provides for these three men. Okay, pay attention to the words that are used. What I find really startling is Abraham ran and Abraham hurried. Whoa, wow. Chapter 19, Lot provides the same kind of hospitality for the two angels who come and visit. Now, why I mention this being so important, because hospitality is really, really, really important for the gospel. That's one reason, but it's also important for our interpretation, because when the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is told, it's often told of, look, they wanted to rape those men. And that's the horror, is they wanted to rape those men, which, mind you, that's really bad to, be raped. Yes. What I want to show, though, is it's not just they were threatening to rape them. It's they were supposed to do what Abraham and Lot did, which is show hospitality to them. So when they should have been saying, here's some food, here's some shelter, here's some companionship, instead it's, here I'm going to forcibly humiliate you and violate you and treat you like you're an enemy. Okay, that's the contrast that I think we fail to see, is that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah isn't rape so much as lack of hospitality. Okay, you got to let that sink in. They're doing the opposite of hospitality. That's the problem. Okay, trust me on this one. It's important. Let it sink in, but I will take your comments on that. Because this puts into perspective then when Lot says, here I have 2 daughters. Now you're going, the horror. And I go, exactly. Better for you to violate my daughters than to violate my house guests. You with me? Because that's really kind of huge. All right, chapter 22. Check this out. God tells Abram to sacrifice his forbidden fruit, to sacrifice Isaac. So 2 things here. One is Isaac is God's chosen. God said, hey, through Isaac, I'm going to keep my promise, Abraham, through Isaac. Now, note what Abram does. First of all, he leaves early in the morning before Sarah gets out of bed, maybe. And chapter 22, verse 5, tell me the significance of this statement. Abraham says to the young men, his servants, he says, stay here with the donkey, because I don't want you to witness what I'm about to do. I just added those words, but pay attention to these words and tell me why it's so amazingly fascinating. Abraham says, I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Okay, I and the boy are going to go and we are going to come back. Abraham knows he's about to sacrifice his son. Okay, you with me? Because this is the profound theological insight of Hebrews 11, and it's based on this verse right here. It's why we need to pay attention to such what seem like minuscule details when we're reading the story, because it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to come back, yada, yada. No, the boy and I are going to go and we're going to come back. Okay. Now that's the amazing part of Abraham's faith. And that's with question number 22. What are the 2 highlight moments of Abraham's story, Genesis 15 and Genesis 22? How is Abraham offered as a positive example? And to me, the positive example is the amazing faith of chapter 15. Hey, look at the stars, you'll give me a son. And 22 of, hey, I'm going to go sacrifice my boy, and then my boy and I are going to come back in chapter 22. Those 2 stories highlighting Abraham's faith is in contrast to the rough road where Abraham has hard time distinguishing between good and bad. Yeah, my wife, she's my sister. Now, mind you, I did read Orson Scott Card's one of my favorite authors, and he wrote historical fiction based on Genesis, and he makes all of these things Abraham does as being good things, and it's fascinating to read. But I think in the story we're supposed to read Abraham as, not choosing very well between good and bad. So Abraham has a rough road. getting to the point where he believes in God in chapter 15, not so much in chapter 16. But then chapter 22, he does again. Oh, one last thing that I remember, chapter 18, this is so great. This debate, this bargaining with God. You know, if there's 50, if there's 45, if there's 40, if there's 30. Abraham is bargaining for the life of, or not bargaining, but we'll say bargaining, discussing with God about not destroying Sodom. Note, does God say no to Abraham at all? Why did Abraham stop? And with those thoughts, God bless you. And note again how this points to Jesus, which hopefully I'll do that in my message, but not right now. Well, I talked about Jesus a little, 3:15, you know. All right, God bless.